Welcome to another episode of Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Ekiyor, and today we are honored to have Dr. Burnice Green, the administrator of a highly successful boys' academy in Rochester, New York State. In this episode, we'll explore how Dr. Green and his team have cultivated an inclusive environment that supports students with ADHD within the general education population. Join us as we explore the Academy's innovative approaches, teacher training, and support systems that empower these students to thrive academically and socially. Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Green.
Hello. How you doing tonight?
Wonderful.
Great. Awesome.
Dr. Green, tell us a little bit about yourself and the story behind your career choice.
Yes, I'd like to begin. I've been in education now for over 33 plus years. And the work that I've been doing with young men started about 20 years ago. As a first year administrator, I had this vision that I was going to be this administrator that was going to be in classrooms supporting teachers and helping them with their pedagogy and things like that. But what I noticed my first year as an administrator, I spent the majority of my time dealing with discipline. I spent the majority of my time dealing with young men and issues and suspensions and referrals coming from classroom teachers. And so I was drained. As a first year administrator, I would go home, I would be drained. Didn't have the opportunity to be in the classrooms and supporting teachers with the work. I said to myself, I can't go another 20 years at this rate. And so what I did that summer, I looked at the research. I looked at all of our referrals and suspensions for that school year. And what I noticed here is that about 16 to 17 young men that particular school year made up about 65% of our entire school year suspensions and referrals. And so I said to myself, if I can support these 16 to 17 young men in whatever way I can, that way I can spend more time in the classroom versus being in my office dealing with, again, suspensions, referrals, and such. And so I wanted to make a difference in the lives of these young men. So that summer, I began to, learn all about these young men. I went to their churches. I began to talk to their parents. I went to their sporting events. If they played football or basketball, I was there in the center of the field watching them play. I wanted to learn as much as I can about these young men. I started what at that time we called the boys group. And so we just begin to work with these young men, begin to build them up and begin to support them and just be there for them. It wasn't nothing, not a rocket science or anything. I just began to invest time into these young men and to learn about them. As a result of that work, we were able to establish a boys group. We put them in uniform, shirt and tie. They began to feel good about themselves. They began to feel a sense of belonging in the school. And it just grew. It just grew. All the young men in the entire school who were not a part of that initial 16 or 17, they wanted to be a part. They wanted to be a part of that brotherhood. It was a lot of work that went involved in that. But what we did is we began to just focus in on these young men, how they learn, what they needed for them to be successful in their classroom. And so as a result of that work, they went from being 65% of the school suspensions and referrals to that next following year to no suspensions, very few referrals. And so we were able to just cut that down almost as if it never existed. And so other young men wanted to be a part of it. We grew it out. We went from 16 to 17 boys that next year to 40 boys to 80 boys to 120 boys. And we went from just a boys group to what we have today, our Boys Academy. The work I do is just really trying to make the difference and to increase the graduation rate for our young men of color. At the time that all of this happened in the school district that they were in, the graduation rate for these young men was 29%. 29% at that particular time. And these young men went on to graduate from high school. That first cohort of 16 and 17 young men, 95% of them graduated from high school.
So, what specific strategies does your boys' academy use to include students with ADHD in the general ed population?
I love that question, especially when it comes to our ADHD population. The first strategies that we use within the Boys Academy to support them is number one is building relationships, understanding the students that you are teaching. We need to understand, and as I mentioned to you with the boys when we first started, I went to their churches, I went to their football games, their basketball games. They saw that I was going to be someone that was going to be consistent in their lives. And so the first strategies that we use for our Boys Academy is building relationships, understanding that, as I call it in my research, the deficit model, understanding that everybody brings something to the table. And as an educator, if we build those relationships, we understand your strengths, we understand your challenges, we understand how we can support you as a student because first we have built those relationships with you.
So let's talk about your teachers, the instructors. Those are the forefront. And so, how are your teachers trained to support students with ADHD in the classroom?
Well, when it comes to teachers, I think first of all we have to understand that the way of traditional teaching may not work for students that have ADHD. And so that traditional teacher that stands in front of the room and and just pour out information, and that those students are going to just sit in their seat with their hands folded and just going to just absorb the information. I call that traditional teaching. That is out the window, right? We can't do that because we have to learn how to what I call differentiate our instruction to support these young men. What we do in the Boys Academy is that we establish routines and rituals so everybody understand what needs to be done. We provide professional development to our teachers so that our teachers understand things that they need to support their students' needs. We have collaboration among our staff where staff support one another. We set high expectations. And so many times when we have students with ADHD, we begin to set the expectations lower. But that's not what we need to do. We need to still have high expectations, but how we get there needs to be different. I mentioned earlier about this thing called deficit model. And when you have a deficit model, what that says is that it must be something wrong with the student. It must be something wrong with their parents, right? And so they're coming in as a deficit. Teachers looking at students as a deficit. But my approach is, and our approach is with the Boys Academy, is that we don't want to look at students as a deficit model. What do they bring to the table? What are they bringing every day? What are their experiences? What are their strengths? What are they bringing to the table? So we take a hard look at ourselves as educators versus, right, pointing the finger or pointing things at our students for young men of color that they're lazy, that they're angry, that they can't behave, that they can only excel in athletics, right? But when you release that deficit model, we as educators and teachers, we understand that we have to take a hard look at ourselves and what we are providing, what supports are in place to support our students to be successful in the learning environment.
To build that trust, what role does your academy play to make sure parents are involved in the process?
Well, one of the things that we have within the Boys Academy, first of all, communication with parents. And I think sometimes we have a misunderstanding what is parent engagement. If a parent doesn't show up for open house or whatever, we'll say, well, the parent is doesn't care or the parent is not engaged, right? But many times there are other opportunities for parents to be engaged and they love their children. We just have to communicate with each parent to support and provide them with strategies they can use to support their children. We have this thing called parent ambassadors, where we have parents at each grade level. And so we call them ambassadors for your children, right? And so they love that. They love the fact that you are welcoming them, that you are including them in the process, that you are providing them with strategies and supports. So sometimes parents just want support. They just want help. They're struggling sometimes with what they need to do with their own children. And instead of us saying that they don't care, instead of us saying that they're not engaged and it's their fault, right? We want to say, how can we support you as a parent so that we're going to work together and as a community together to support your child? And they love it and they are engaged, they're coming. When you do that, attendance improve, right? So now our young men went from the lowest attendance to now 80, 90, 95% of attendance, only because now when a kid isn't there, you call a parent, right? They understand that you're not calling them to say something negative. You just call them to say, hey, where is such? Why isn't he here? He's on his way, Dr. Green. We were behind a little bit. When you build that rapport with parents and let them know that you're there to support, all these things happen. Attendance engagement improve. Students begin to feel a sense of belonging, like they belong in the school. Their voices are heard, right? You begin to hear their voices. You begin to hear their concerns, their needs, and everybody's working together to support them.
The next thing I want to talk about is community resources. Do you think we have enough community resources to really support kids with ADHD outside what you are doing?
I think there's a lot of things, all the stakeholders have to come into play, whether it's community, recreation centers, churches, mentors. All of us have to work together in order to provide the best learning experience for students with ADHD. I think awareness, the work that you're doing, bringing awareness to this issue, and the more we begin to talk about it, I believe that this is what provides the necessary resources to support our students. Just to talk. People don't have this conversation. And when they have the conversation, it's always a negative conversation, right? It's always about what the students don't have. But when you begin to have these enriched conversations around students and that it's not their fault and that it's not something that they did wrong, right? I believe that this will support all of the resources that we would need as educators to support our students as we move forward, right? We know that, especially for young men of color, that the gap between young men of color and their white counterparts is a gap. And even though billions of dollars has been spent over the last 45, 50 years to decrease the gap continued to increase. And so we have to figure out, what can we do as educators to support. I'm going to tell you the story. I had a young man who was a sixth grader who was in special ed. And, ADHD, misbehaving, it was just the works. And when he was a sixth grader, he was suspended from school and the mother came to me and she was like, Mr. Green, I don't know what to do. It's like, the school keep calling me and it just seemed like I'm about to lose my job and I got to keep coming to, she was really, really frustrated, but I can see that she really was concerned and she really wanted to do something about her son. Well, he was a sixth grader. He was getting ready to leave our building. And at the time, I had 7th and 8th grader boys academy at that time. And so I talked to the mother and we worked it out. At that time, I didn't have 7th grade special ed services. So what we needed to do is we had to get them declassified. We had to get him enrolled in our boys academy in order for him to stay there with us. While he was there, all of these strategies, some of the things that we was able to talk about today and providing that differentiated instruction and giving him space, allowing him to get up and walk around and giving him breaks and just allowing him to have a sense of belonging in school. All of these things we began to incorporate into this young man. And what we noticed, his attendance improved. There was no referrals. His mother didn't get any phone calls home. There was no suspensions. He began to excel as his academics began to improve. And all of this is because of the strategies and supports that we were able to put in place for him. He went on to graduate from high school. He received a scholarship to the University of Alabama to play football. This was a young man who was, as a sixth grader, diagnosed, as they say, with ADHD, couldn't behave, couldn't do this, misbehaving. Parent felt like she's about to lose her job. She didn't know what to do. So we were able to incorporate all of these things. And I know we don't have enough time to talk about all of the strategies that we did with him, but we were able to just, what I'm telling you, it can be done. The work can be done, and we have evidence that when we look beyond that deficit model of ADHD and begin to understand what they bring to the table and provide the strategies and the differentiation and the things that's needed for our students, they can and they will be successful. He went on to, listen, he got a scholarship to the university, play football, to the University of Alabama. This was a kid in sixth grade that was in special ed services. And all we did was declassify him and put him in a program that met his needs. Isn't that something?
Wow. That's powerful. Thank you for that story. I always say stories bring to light the possibilities because that's reality, Dr. Gray. What advice do you have for administrators and teachers that are still struggling with creating an inclusive environment for students?
Thank you for that question. That's a good question. I would say relationships. Relationships matter. When students believe and trust that you care about them and that they begin to feel a sense of belonging in the school and not here we come, but feel like they belong and their voices are heard through relationships. My advice is build those relationships. And when you build those relationships in an effective way, you will see the results in students' academic achievement. I would say that build also understand all of the community stakeholders that play a role in the life of that student, from their football coaches to their pastors in their churches to you'll say a student have ADHD, but then they'll go to church and they'll sit there all day for 3 or 4 hours in church and listen to the pastor preach. All right, why? Why is that? Why is that? Let's understand everything that they're involved in, right? And then provide accommodations within the classroom to support the needs of your student. All students can't just sit there for 30, 40 minutes while you pour into them, right? And then finally, and I'm really big on this, is to eliminate stereotypes. Eliminate things that impede opportunities for students to grow. If you have those stereotypes, if you have a certain perception of what students with ADHD have and it's not positive, you need to really begin to take a close look at yourself versus saying something is wrong with the student. That's my advice.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Green. It's been
Thank
a
you.
very, very insightful session. And as we wrap up today's episode of Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed, Dr. Green has emphasized that the secret, walking away
Yes.
from that deficit mindset, looking for the strengths,
Come on.
relationships,
That's it.
is the foundation is relationships. They participate with the students, they get to know the students, they bring the parents as part of the
Come on.
system. And
That's it.
this has been, for me, it's an eye opener because I've seen your school and I know what you're talking about and I understand the passion you bring into this field. We're so grateful and we thank you
Thank
for
you.
all you do. Yes.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I know when I start talking about this, I just get energized because I know that we can make a difference in the lives of our students if we just just understand, what the bigger picture of what's happening
Yes.
with this. So
Yes.
thank you for this opportunity.
So thank you. It's inspiring to hear about the dedication and thoughtful strategies that make a difference in the lives of our students. We hope this conversation has offered valuable perspectives for educators, parents, and anyone interested in the intersection of ADHD and education. Thank you for tuning in and don't forget to subscribe for more enlightening discussions. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and continuing the conversation. Thank you.